Thank you all for attending today's Teams meetings on using help documentation APL64. Since we're covering documentation on the screen, you should see that I have the user manual open on the left-hand side of the screen. That is the table of contents. In particular, what we want to do is go to the help menu, since that is actually where anyone that wants to access the documentation would want to go in APL64. Okay, so as I stated, the help menu contains the documentation topics for accessing all the documents that are available in APL64. If I scroll down to the next page, you'll see that there is an image of what's available in the help menu. Those are all of the basic topics. Under those topics of categories, you'll see subtopics that contains information about specific documentation. Let's go ahead and begin with the APL language. You're not going to see it on the screen, but on the right side of the screen, you'll see that once I open up the APL language, that provides all of the subtopics: primitive functions, system variables, and etc. And if I open up the developer version GUI, you'll see that that also contains a list of the subcategories as well for the documentation. For anyone that has not accessed the user manual, this actually kind of gives a general layout. So it says the APL language contains all the reference information, which is the language information for APL64. The developer version GUI has all the reference information on using the various facilities of APL64, including this user manual, and also all of the GUI session-related information, and also features of the APL64 environment. There's also a command line, and that's basically the reference information for initializing the startup of APL64 when it launches. There's also another topic that is very important to anyone that's coming from APL+Win, which is APL+Win compatibility document. That's a useful document for those that are migrating from APL+Win to APL64. And if there are certain features or behaviors that are different between the two, that is a document that any APL64 programmer will definitely want to take advantage of. The next subcategory, which is the history, APL64 history, that contains every document dating back to the very first version of APL64, which we at that time used to call it the APL64 project. There's documentation that covers all of them, as well as any of the production versions of APL64 up to the current 2025.0.8 update. There's another submenu item called Search All Documentation. I will discuss that. I will cover that a little bit later because that's a little bit more involved. But there are subcategories under that, which are documentation. Which are basically features to be able to search the documentation using the Adobe, and also searching the documentation using the Google. And there's some differences, very important difference between how those two are used. There's also product support, which contains documentation on how to contact us for support. There's also another documentation that provides the end user license agreement, which essentially is the license agreement for the APL64 system. There's a system highlights. I will discuss that briefly later. Basically, when APL64 starts, it will actually attempt to communicate with our web server, which contains the documentation to see if there's any new system highlights. And I will actually demonstrate that a little bit later. There's also an About APL64 that displays the general information, and let me demonstrate that right now. And that contains information about the version number as well as system information. It also contains any of the modules that are actually used in APL64. We're going to close that. And let's see here. I'm not sure if I can see both on the screen, but after the About APL64, you'll see that there's a documentation topic history. Whenever you are accessing the documentation, the previous documentation that was accessed will be listed under this documentation topic history. There's another important option under the help menu, which is documentation options. You see that I've displayed it up on the screen here. And I will also get to that later as well, but I just wanted to kind of give you a preview of that as well. And the last item is going to be the licensing and activation, which everyone is familiar with. That is what's required to access, to actually instantiate the license of APL64 on one's machine. But that's not really documentation, but I just kind of wanted to just, I guess, review that for everyone. Okay, so let's begin by giving you a pretty direct demonstration. Let's see here. I'm going to click on Help, and let's just say I wanted to access the system functions. I would navigate to APL language, then click on System Functions. When that runs, you'll see that what's happened at this point, it's actually accessed the PDF documents. By the way, all of the APL64 documentation are saved as a Adobe PDF file, and we do that because it's portable, which means that it should be viewable from any device that supports the Adobe Acrobat format. Just a warning to those, we just did learn from a user, not that we'd ever tried it ourselves, but if you're trying to access APL64 documentation from a device that does not have APL64 installed on it, you may have some issues with the fonts. And what we have now since discovered is that the tool that we use to save the Word documents to a PDF document was not properly storing those fonts. So we will be going through our documentation, updating them using the local versions of the converter, and that seems to work correctly. So none of you guys I know are trying to access the documentation outside of your APL, outside of your machines, which has the licensed APL64 installed in it. So this is primarily going to be a non-issue, but that is something that we'll be accessing in the future. So in any case, back to the APL64 functions document, you'll see that it has come up in the browser. By the way, notice that it came up in the browser, and the reason they did that is because by default, Windows is configured to display PDF documents that are launched from the website in a browser. Now, if you had another application that had to that was associated in Windows to handle PDF files, that particular application would have been used. Moving on, we no longer need this document, so I'm going to close. Things in the way. I'll just leave it up for the time being. That's okay. Okay, so back in APL64, let's go ahead and click on some other document. Let's see, developer version GUI. Let's just say developer version GUI quick start. That just takes a moment to start and open up. And you can see that that was rather pretty quick. It's just a matter of a couple seconds. Now, part of the reason being there is that I have a fairly fast 1 gig internet speed, so that certainly helps as far as navigating to our documents on a server that's remote. So, but as they say, your mileage may vary, or your results may vary, obviously depending on your internet speeds, perhaps the speed of your machine, and also other external factors. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's generally how you would access the documentation from within APL64. Now, there's one other thing that that some users may or may not be aware of. but we also have support for the F1 key for context-sensitive help. So this is a new feature in APL64 that did not exist in APL plus Win. So for example, in APL64, if I were to type right print, let's just say quad sysid, okay? As long as the caret is anywhere near the proximity of that element as we're calling them, if I press the F1 key, if you look down here on the status bar, you'll see that it says fetching quad sysid help topic and system function document. Once that is completed, you'll see that it in fact has opened up the system function document, and it has actually gone to the sysid topic within that document. So that is a very nice, useful tool. I don't know how many of you guys are actually using that, but if you were not aware of it, that facility is available. Let's just try as another example. If I do right print WSID, now this is a system command. If I press F1 on that, if you look on the status bar at the very bottom, you'll see fetching WSID in the help system command. And you'll see that here, it's actually opened up the system command document to the WSID system command. And just as a last example, I will say, let's just do row, which is an APL glyph. If I press F1 on that, you'll see that on the status bar, it says fetching row help topic in the system primitive. And voila, we now have the shape or the reshape, depending on which one you're trying to navigate to. So that's pretty nice and easy, and it's a very useful tool. That's accessing the documentation. Now, let's go ahead and go back to the help menu. And I did say that we were going to revisit the search all documentation options. And you'll notice that also when you go to a particular document, let's just start with the Adobe documentation with Adobe. Okay, now that's just going to provide general documentation. I actually had it opened here, which actually gives you an overview of how to use these tools to access the search all capability with either using Adobe or using the Google search engine. Now, there is two main differences, actually one main difference between the two. If you're using the Adobe PDF, that is only for files that are locally downloaded on your machine. Okay? And when you're using the Google search, obviously it's using the Google web searching capabilities, which will actually do a search of all the documents that we have stored on our website that are related to APL64. So in order to use that, to demonstrate that, let me go back here under the Help menu. I'm going to go down to Documentation Options. Okay? Now, in the Documentation Options, there are a couple fields here. And if you just actually move the mouse over each of the fields, and also on the buttons, it actually gives you a nice little context help, which is useful. Okay, so the local documentation path, that is going to be the location where the files have locally been downloaded at some point. Okay, for this purposes, because it does take some time to actually download the files, I'm not going to actually download them. I've already pre-downloaded them. But if I click on the browse, I'm going to go to I think the docs is what I want to do. Go to APL64 docs. Okay. So that's the local location of the files. And if you bear with me one second, I'm going to actually show you the files that are currently residing in that APL64 docs. You'll see that these are the APL64 documentation that have already been downloaded to the machine. Okay. So now that that has been shown to you, okay, so moving on. Typically, the browse file, the browse URL prefix is required in order to be able to access the files locally. Now, by default, what would happen is that if I did not have the viewer application present, okay, and then I clicked on OK, just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to now click on APL language, primitive functions. Now, what should happen is that because I've got the help documentation local, what it's going to do is fetch the local copy of the document and then display that in the browser, because that's my default. And you'll see that that's exactly what's happened. Okay. Now, if I go back to the documentation options and I go and put back in the viewer application, that will override the browser. And so when I click on OK, and then I do the same thing again, accessing the same primitive functions, instead of opening the document in the browser, it will now open it up in the Adobe Acrobat that's installed locally on my machine. You can disregard that message, and now you'll see that the same document has now been opened in the Adobe Acrobat viewer. And you have the same functionality here as you do elsewhere. Okay, now, while I am here, I can now demonstrate the other feature, which I said that I would revisit, which was the searching capability, searching all the documents using the Adobe searching feature. Now, let's see here. I'm going to click on the Find Text or Tools, which is a magnifying glass. Okay. Then I'm going to click on the three dots. Then that will display the advanced search. Okay. In the advanced search field, you'll see that where would you like to search? I can search in the current document, or I can search in all the PDF documents that are going to be located in a specific path. In my case, I'm going to actually go back and choose APL60. Nope, not there. Let me go it the hard way. Location. APL64 docs, excellent. Okay, great. So now what I'm doing here is, like I said, I'm going to be searching for all the documents, and I can search on a specific word or phrase. Let's say I wanted to search on quad sys verb, but I'm going to do it here. I'm going to do quad sys ID. I'm going to copy that as the phrase or word that I'm going to search on. And I'm going to restrict it to whole words only. You can also have case sensitivity, include bookmarks, or include content. In any case, I'm going to click on search. Yes, I do want to allow this operation. And now what it's doing is searching all of the documents that are stored in my C:\APL64 docs folder. And the results field should then list any of the documents which contains quad sys ID in it. Some of these documents are fairly long, but in any case, I'm going to go ahead and stop this for the time being, but you'll see that in the results, I want to locate the quad sys ID in the system function. So now I click on system function, and now it did open up that document. Now, unlike APL 64, you'll see that it's actually opened it up to the table of contents with the highlighted on the word. So it's just a matter of clicking on it, and then it takes me to the quad sys. I know it did take me there. Did it not take me there?
I think I've used this. I don't, John. I don't use Adobe that much. But if you look on the left-hand screen, you opened up, and it shows you all the locations. You can click
Right.
on each
I
one
must have just did
individually.
it for the, okay, I
Yeah,
must have just
yeah,
did it for the table of
yeah.
contents. Yep,
That's right.
yep, I see that. Okay.
Very good.
But I think what's happening is the mouse scroll is kind of jumping more than I want to. In any case, it does show quad sys ID with system identifier. So that demonstrates that the search capability using Adobe does, in fact, work. And so that's a nice, useful tool. For those of you, Adobe Acrobat is primarily installed on most users' machine. If you don't happen to have it, or you happen to have the non-free version, that also should work as well. But there is a link in the document that tells you how to download the free version of the Adobe Acrobat Reader. So that works for that. Now, let me go and close the Adobe search capability. Let's go back to APL64, and I'm just going to now demonstrate the Google search. Search with Google. Okay, so when you click on the search with Google, you'll see the text to find. Now, let's go ahead and let's do the same sort of thing. Quad sys ID. I need to click on, I say use Chrome, Google Chrome browser, click on find. You'll see that it launched the Chrome browser. Let me just widen the screen here. You can just bypass the AI feature, and you'll see that one of the hits it did provide you was quad sys ID in the system functions document. Click on that. Now, that will not take you to the exact topic. It will only actually open up the document. That is just the limitation of that particular feature. But you'll see that now it actually does allow you to search all of the documents that are on our server, also using the Google feature. So that's also a nice little handy tool to have, and that in fact does work. Let me minimize this for the time being. No longer need that. And I guess the last thing I will mention is that we have a nice little handy feature in APL64, which I refer to, which are system highlights. And what that will do is that occasionally what we will do is that we will put out bulletins. For example, there was a bulletin about I believe that something was being deprecated, but let me just do the recent highlights. There is nothing recent there, but I do know that there is something recent there. So what I'm going to do for the purpose of this demonstration is I'm going to restart APL64, and I'm going to apply all the default settings. I'm going to say yes, and APL64 will appear. Okay, I don't want to do that. Voila. Okay, so you'll notice that this time when APL64 appeared, one of the nice things it did was that it provided you a new announced document, which is the announcement of APL64 2025.0.9 update is coming. And here is the list of the features that will reported to be in the next upcoming release. This is by no means everything. We have a backlog of stuff that are in the pipeline. So this kind of gives you a nice little general overview about what's coming in the next update since the last production release of 2025.0.8.
The reason that John had to go to the default the settings is because he had reviewed all of these. When you review them, it marks them as not new anymore, so they don't bother you to show up. But for users of the system in production, you don't have to reset back to original defaults or anything like that. You can also go out to help and go out to the system highlights and yeah, that
You can turn it off and on.
yeah, you can. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
Yep, no problem. And then
John, what is, oh, sorry.
go ahead, Sonia.
Go ahead, Sonia.
I'm just curious, when you were doing the search on recent highlights, what is the time clock for recent? How far back would it go?
It will probably go back as far as it needs to. In other words, if you start anew,
Go out to recent system highlights there. Okay, so I believe that until we delete one, they'll all be there. Okay, and the you can click on any one of these things. So
Okay,
that's what. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, so it's not really recent, it's a history more than recent.
Well, the topmost is going to be the most the recent.
Okay,
They're
so
all
it
by
goes
date.
from the recent
It's
chronologically
order.
backward.
Yeah,
Okay.
That is correct. Yep.
but to see the recent, if you have this feature turned on, you can turn it off. If you have this feature turned on, when you start up a new instance of the developer version of APL64, it will show you, it will display in the browser the recent one.
On the top, right? So it's chronologically backwards.
Right,
So you
yes,
get the history. Okay,
Right,
thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, and it only shows you the most recent one. It does not show you all of them. Okay. I think that is pretty much it as far as the documentation. By the way, for those of you that are not aware, we do have a YouTube channel. We kind of discussed that prior to having this meeting while we're waiting for everyone to join. There's a video on the F1 key context sensitive documentation. There's also a second video on the searching with the Google capability. And as I said, they're all on the APL Now YouTube channel for those of you that are not familiar with that. So please
John, can you go out there just to show them what it looks like? Because there are also tutorials. The tutorials use an artificial voice. It's actually pretty good. So
yeah, you should have gotten also. Everybody should have gotten an email or constant contact message about it. All of our previous Teams meetings also posted after the meeting, so that if you want to go back and refresh, or if you miss one, you can see those on there as well.
And the reason I mentioned these two in particular is because as I was preparing for this meeting, I noticed that neither of those have had any views. So we're trying to get views and clicks. It all helps. Okay, so I think that is it for the presentation. We can open it up to the floor for any questions anyone has.